Hey, what's up everyone? This is Isaiah. I am a licensed professional counselor, and today we are talking about religious freedom bills as they relate to counselors and the entire profession of counseling and mental health. So I read recently that Idaho has just passed a religious freedom law for counselors and therapists to be able to choose who they see based on their sincerely held beliefs. And this comes after an initial wave of religious freedom bills that went through Texas, Mississippi, and Tennessee back in 2016 with very similar wording. Something that's specifically different about the Idaho bill, however, is that religious freedom is not specifically mentioned, but it only talks about sincerely held principles, which is actually a much broader category. You don't even have to establish that there's some kind of religious basis behind your principles here. So the debate is whether this is ostensibly a right to discriminate, particularly against transgender individuals, where there's been a lot of hotbed of discussion about whether doctors, medical professionals, or anyone in some kind of service industry is obligated to serve somebody who lives a lifestyle or whose identity does not agree with that provider's sincerely held beliefs. So let's dig into how that affects the client and counselor relationship and whether this is even a good thing for counselors at all. So the specific wording of this Idaho bill really makes it problematic, even beyond what we see in the religious freedom bills that have passed in other states. Under the wording of this bill, as a counselor, if I lived in Idaho and this bill were to be passed into law, I could say that any client who's making decisions or setting goals that don't agree with what I think are appropriate for them or violate my sincerely held principles and beliefs, I can deny service to them. And that's problematic because that completely flips the power dynamic. Now clients are beholden to their counselors. So suddenly this whole idea of client autonomy is flipped on its head because now it depends on our approval. Their goals, whatever they're working towards, has to be rubber stamped by us in order to continue receiving services. Let's leave the realm of transgender issues for right now and see how that could play out in other situations. We can talk about drug use. There are some counselors who personally they might feel abstinence is the best way to go, completely not using drugs, and that's the only way that you can really call yourself clean. But there might be some clients who say like, hey, I'm not ready to give up alcohol just yet. I'm not ready to give up marijuana just yet. Can we try to taper things down? And at that point, you have a conflict between what the client's goals are and what the counselor's sincerely held values are. And I'm not saying, counselors, that you can't believe what you believe. There's nothing in this bill that says you cannot believe what you want. There's nothing that says if you work with a client whose principles you don't agree with, that you're automatically condoning or that you're affirming their values. You're just providing services for them based on the principles that are important to them. But what that means in the drug use example is that now I can say, your goals do not align with what I think is right for you or what is right for myself, and therefore I can choose not to serve you anymore. So now clients are walking a thin line between wanting to please their counselors or make sure that their goals line up with the values that the counselor holds. That completely shifts the power dynamic that is necessary for counseling to take place. Well, let's talk about family therapy for a moment. What if I, as the counselor, don't believe that spanking is right for families? What if I don't believe in corporal punishment and a family is working with me and then suddenly the issue of spanking comes up and we realize, oh, these parents spank their children and I don't approve of that. So now I can say, I'm sorry, I'm going to deny you service because your principles don't agree with my principles. There's also an element where we as counselors, as the professionals in the room, we need to aspire to be better than just our personal beliefs. Even if these bills do get passed into law, I'm guessing that that won't be a complete safety net for counselors to just discriminate and pick which clients they want to work with that best agree with their principles. We belong to professional organizations. We're responsible to state licensing boards, and all of those professional organizations may have their own ethical standards, and we're always taught in grad school if there is a discrepancy between different ethical standards or laws, You aspire to follow the strictest one. That's, as professionals, we aspire to be better. We don't go for the lowest bar, we try to reach the highest bar of what applies to us as mental health professionals. And so I hope for any counselors who are considering this or are in a state where this is an issue, that we don't try to just go for the lowest bar, and that we try as professionals to respect our clients, to respect our profession, to do better than that. Another issue when we're talking about the client autonomy piece is that unrelated issues can become central to the counseling process. So let's say I have a transgender client who comes into my office. Let's say I don't agree with their lifestyle or their identity, right? Maybe they're not here to talk about their gender identity at all. Maybe they're here for anxiety or for depression, and they're saying, let's talk about my depression, let's talk about trauma I've had in the past, let's talk about anxiety. If I choose to turn them away from my services based on their transgender identity, suddenly I'm saying all of those concerns that you had are not as important as the fact that you are a transgender person. And so this unrelated issue, I've suddenly, as a counselor, made central. They're not saying it's a problem at all, but I'm saying it's a problem. And I'm saying that because of that, you don't deserve to have services from me. That's a huge problem when we're talking about client autonomy. It's no longer them who get to set the goals. It's if there's something that I think is more important, that's enough to deny them services for, suddenly that becomes the issue. And I, as a counselor, as a professional, I'm putting that at the forefront when it may never have been a problem for them. And so let's talk a little bit about the dichotomy here between competency and discrimination. And I think that's a line that counselors are going to be trying to walk if they try to invoke these religious freedom bills in the future to protect their practice or to protect their license when they're saying they're turning away maybe transgender clients in particular. So here's the thing. As counselors, we cannot be competent in everything. That would be irresponsible for us to take on every single client and indiscriminately and say, yeah, I can work equally well with anybody. So there are those protections built in that if we feel like we are not competent in working with a client, that's a conversation that we need to have with that client. If we haven't had adequate training, or we feel like there may be a safety issue, if we feel like we would be doing more harm by taking on this client than providing benefit, absolutely it is our responsibility to find them somebody who specializes in that area or who has that competency to treat their specific problem. So competency is about professional ability. Discrimination is about personal preference. And as the professional in the room, I need to put my personal preference aside so that I can provide the best care for the person in front of me. And providing the best care when it comes to competency sometimes means referring them out to somebody who is better equipped to serve them in their specific area of need. But again, discrimination turns into my personal preference. I would rather not work with somebody who is transgender or somebody who does this or does that. So here's my bottom line on this. These laws, especially the much broader wording around sincerely held principles in Idaho's bill and other states around the country, has a lot of potential to hurt the counseling profession, a lot of potential to hurt the people who are seeking mental health treatment, especially as these laws spring up in response to transgender rights activism and bills seeking to protect transgender people. These bills have a lot of potential to harm a very vulnerable population. And as we think through that as counselors, even if we are sincerely in some kind of ethical dilemma where we don't feel comfortable working with somebody who may be transgender, let's say, that is our responsibility as professionals to think through that, to be okay with that personal discomfort because we're the professional and we are there to support and care for the person in front of us. Everyone, thank you so much for checking out this video. If you want to catch more current issues in mental health, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And we really appreciate your support as we continue to grow and make great content for you all. See you all next time.